I would like to show you a game between Wesley So and Magnus Carlsen, as I believe you are going to learn a lot by watching this video. I'm going to show a middle game concept which was employed by the greatest player of all time, Magnus Carlsen. And I think it's really fascinating as it teaches you a lot of things, not only about the middle game, how you can build up an attack or generally increase the pressure on your opponent, but also how you can work it out even towards the end game. It's all shown in this game. Wesley So playing with the white pieces opens up with a move 1c4, and after knight f6, knight f3, e6, knight c3, d5, we do get the semi-Tarrasch defense, which is a very solid, reliable opening. Both sides are placing these pawns in the middle of the board. Likely these pawns are going to get exchanged. And Magnus is one of the greatest experts on this field. And after the move a6, very interesting modern twist here is with the idea to take on c4 and try to prepare b5 in case white recaptures with the bishop. So white's going to take on d5. We do recapture with the pawn. And now Wesley goes for the move g3. He believes that the bishop is better off on g2. It's one of the many ways of playing this line. And now Magnus goes c4. Interesting move as he releases the tension in the center. And basically the idea is that later on you can try to push your b pawn, and then obviously black has a nice pawn chain on the queen side, and later on this can become a big asset. So let's see what happens. Bishop g2, bishop b4, pinning the knight on c3. Both sides are going to castle now, and here white plays the move knight e5. So far everything is pretty standard. Black goes rook e8, white goes bishop d2, so all minor pieces have been developed, and here knight c6 is on the board. And interestingly, this position has been reached in various Grandmaster games, and Magnus has been experimenting with both colors, so he knows the ins and outs of this position. With the last move, black is intending to take on e5 twice, winning a pawn. So in a lot of games, including a game of Magnus with the white pieces against Dubov and against Mamliarov, he decided to take on c6, and now after b takes c6, b3 is an interesting idea to challenge that pawn on c3. But after a move like a5, black is doing absolutely fine, because the idea is that after b takes c4, you're not going to take with the pawn, but you're going to play here the move bishop a6, so that you're pinning the pawn on c4, and if you can recapture with the bishop, black has a lot of piece activity on that side of the board. So Magnus, of course, familiar with it from the white side, he now is facing it with the black pieces, and Wesley plays here the move a3 instead, so that if black is going to take, you do take back with the bishop, and the bishop overprotects the knight on e5, so you're avoiding the loss of a pawn. But of course you don't have to capture on c3. Bishop a5 is a very sensible move, maintaining the tension, and here white goes for the move b4, challenging the bishop. And well, if the bishop goes away, that's absolutely fine, but white is saying, okay, the queen side is blocked, you have a protected passed pawn, but my knight is a great blockader, so you're not able to make any progress. So therefore the move c takes b3 has been played. Pawns are getting swapped. Now if white does recapture with the queen, there is knight takes e5, d takes e5, rook takes e5, and black is a pawn up. I mean, white still has compensation because this pawn is not too great, but in any case there's no need to recapture right away. First knight takes c6, and after b takes, you do take back with the queen. So here, this is the moment I would like to briefly discuss with you what is happening here. So materials even, both sides have more or less completed their development. Well, the bishop from c8 still needs to be brought into play, but what is black really trying to do here? Well, that's very interesting, as on one hand you have a pawn on c6, which is on a half open file, and if you're not going to do anything, that pawn can be targeted by white's major pieces. In particular, you put a rook on the c file, or a queen can come there to attack the pawn. So you don't want to really wait and see how that pawn is going to be targeted. So you should try to look for compensation here. And the key move which black's play is all about here is looking for a way to generate some play on the king side. And the move h5 is nowadays a very nice attacking weapon in a lot of positions. We know the idea to challenge a fianchettoed king side, so you have a hook, you would like to play h4, but in the past, in most games, you only see this advance of the h-pawn with opposite castled kings. Now, the reason you can play this move is that it's not really weakening the black king. The black king is absolutely safe, white's pieces are not nearby at all, so we are able to use that h-pawn in order to challenge white's king side. Now the big question is, of course, what is White going to do? Is he going to ignore it or just react? If you play h4, for instance, to stop the march of the h-pawn, probably bishop f5 can be played. Later on, we can put a piece on g4, and White can no longer kick the knight or the bishop away with the move h3. And having that knight on g4, it means that there are potential tactical ideas against these pawns. I mean, not immediately, but that's something we are looking for. And later on, if you do get a chance to play g5, you challenge the pawn on h4, and step by step, black is looking for ways to open up the files towards the white king. That is the main strategy. Anyway, White didn't go for the move h4, play the move queen c2. Queen is coming back to prevent the bishop from coming to f5, but now the pawn comes to h4. Is that a free pawn? Can White take it? Well, if you do so, there is bishop c7, and now the pawn on g3 is definitely missed. You can set up a battery of queen and bishop threatening checkmate, and sooner or later that pawn will be regained. So it's not an extra pawn you can really try to exploit as White. So White is going to ignore that pawn, played here the move rook fc1. So White is obviously trying to play on the c file and hoping to prove that this pawn on c6 is a liability in the long run. And here, I think another very interesting moment, as Magnus shows very deep understanding with his next move. You're really gonna enjoy it. And he played here the move h3, whereas I believe that most of you would probably think, okay, let's just open up that position. Let's put, let's take the pawn on g3, so that after recapturing, White is missing that pawn on the h file, and who knows, if you can swing over with your major pieces to the h file at some point, okay, White's king is more vulnerable. Long-term planning, interesting stuff, but Magnus has a totally different approach. As he advances the pawn to h3, he is not going to open up that h file. He is attacking the bishop goes away, and then he just continues the game. He brings the bishop out to g4, and there are various other ways of playing. But why did black play in such a way? This pawn on h3 is a very annoying pawn. If White's bishop would not be on g2, it could just be checkmate. The only thing black needs to do is bring a queen to g2. And of course, that's not going to happen in one or two moves, but black's strategy is based on eliminating the defenders which are preventing the black queen from entering on g2. And this is a long-term problem. You cannot get rid of the pawn on h3. It's going to be there for a long time. It's a nuisance. It's annoying the black king, as we will get to see in this game. So for now, nothing is happening, but later on, things will change. Now White decided to drop back with a knight to b1. Maybe a remarkable move. I think something like knight a4 with the idea to jump in with a knight to c5 at some point makes more sense. But knight b1 is on the board with the idea that if you do take on d2, you can recapture with a knight, and this knight covers vital squares on e4 and f3. However, knight on b1 is badly placed, so why on earth would black consider taking that bishop? He just drops back to b6. That's excellent strategy. But wait a second, White can take the pawn on c6 with the queen. Is that a good idea? Well, it was not played by Wesley, and for a good reason, because Magnus had been calculating like a machine. Definitely his idea was to sacrifice the bishop on d4, capturing a very valuable pawn, hitting the rook. But what happens if you take the bishop? Now the rook comes over to c8 to attack the queen. The queen gotta go away. Let's say it goes to a4. Now you take on c1 with check, bishop recaptures, and now we also understand the bishop sacrifice as the e file has been opened. Rook e1 is there with checkmate. And why is checkmate? Indeed, because of that pawn on h3. Fantastic strategy and very typical for these lines. And we will get to see more back rank mate motives. So instead of capturing the pawn, White played here the move bishop to b4. Bishop goes away, trying to control, for instance, the c5 square, but allowing the knight to come in to e4. And this is also a very nice spot for the knight. For instance, if you do over the exchange of knights here with the move knight c3, I believe that knight g5 with the plan of going to f3, trying to force the exchange of white's main defender on h1, that would be a huge achievement. I don't think knight c3 is a good move. If you would play the move knight d2, which has the advantage that if knight goes back to g5, the knight at least covers the f3 square. But now, another beautiful tactical shot I want to show you was not played in the game, this move knight d2, but just an illustration of what can happen when black carries out this typical strategy of advancing the h-pawn. Here, key move is knight takes f2, with the point that if you take with the king, another sacrifice. Bishop takes d4, something you may not have expected, but bishop takes e3 is on the agenda. If you do take the bishop, now the rook comes in with check, king gotta go back. And now it's queen f6, threatening checkmate on f2. If you get the rook back to f1, now it's queen takes d4 with check. Look how vulnerable this king is. And also with this bishop on h1, this king is not able to step into the corner. If rook f2, it's queen takes f2 with checkmate. All very standard way of playing. Knight e4 is an excellent move, exerting pressure on these weak pawns. Black is about to get the queen in to f6, maybe bishop f3 will come next. Queen takes c6 is also not possible because of rook c8. This time there's no bishop on d2 to protect the rook on c1, while the bishop on g4 protects the rook on c8. So white is forced to give up the queen here. Fantastic tactical ideas, and I really wanted to show you. Now back to the game. Bishop takes e4 was played, but this is a really drastic measure. White couldn't withstand the pressure, decided to whip off that knight, but at a very high price for it, because the bishop was the main defender. Now you take back with the rook. Okay, knight e2 is played, so you're attacking the rook with that knight. Rook goes back to e6, and here look, the rook is nicely defending that weak pawn. Queen d3, queen f6. Now the queen is coming into play. No immediate threats yet, but you gotta watch out. Maybe at some point the f3 square can be used. If the knight is not there, you can try to come in with your queen. But not for now. Queen f1 was played. And here also very interesting moment, as I think the move played by Magnus is probably not the one we were thinking about. Like, you would like to use your rook, let's say rook a8, but the problem is that the pawn on a6 is hanging and the queen can always snag that pawn and come back very quickly. So if you're going to play for an attack, white's task is relatively simple. You just need to hold the pressure on that side of the board. But Magnus is having a different plan. He goes back with his rook to e8 to connect the rooks. And after rook a b1, he brings this rook to b8. So his plan is trying to gain control over the only open file. Bishop c5 is played, and now bishop a5. Look, what's happening here? You're attacking the knight. If the knight would go away, it was not played in the game, there is this move queen f3. The queen comes in. If you take the bishop, the queen on f1 is still covering that square, but definitely bishop f5 is black's idea. Look, you're attacking the rook. If rook takes b8, there's nothing you can really do against this move. Look, bishop e4 is coming. Rook d1, bishop e4, and it's going to be checkmate on h1 on the next move. Amazing strategy. You see that this knight is now the main defender, cannot leave its post. Bishop b4 was played. White is looking for a way to repeat moves, but bishop goes back. You keep the bishop on the board. It's a good attacker. Bishop to c3 played. And now black is not in a rush, just advances the pawn, ready to bring it to a4, for instance, or at least this rook is no longer needed to keep the pawn defended. And white basically cannot do much, and black has a lot of different ideas, including a bishop to f5 or queen to g6, hoping at some point trying to gain control over the open file. Maybe the bishop can come to d6 or the queen can come to d6, attacking the pawn on a3. Lot of ideas, while in the long run, this pawn on h3 is still really problematic for white. White played f3, trying to generate some counterplay, but basically now he's blowing up his own position. Bishop goes back to f5, hitting the rook, and white plays e4. Definitely no need to take on e4 now, because rooks can get swapped, and after f takes e4, bishop is under threat, bishop goes away, queens will be swapped. That's not what you're looking for. So black is not in a rush, just goes back with the bishop to e6. And now these pawns are coming forward, but we have already seen how vulnerable white's king is. White played the move e5, dreaming perhaps of some sort of expansion in the center. Maybe you can try to steamroll your opponent, but wait a second, things are not that simple. Queen e7, hitting the pawn on a3. And if you try to save the pawn, which was not the game's continuation, there's rook b1, and Magnus would have seen this tactic for sure. Bishop takes e5, taking the pawn, d5, and it's now queen c5, and you win back the piece being a pawn up. So that's excellent news. Therefore, white needs to surrender the control over the open file, plays rook to a1, and now it's time for playing the move c5, opening up the center, so that if this diagonal will be opened, the white king is in severe trouble. If dc5, queen c5, king h1, because it was check, of course, I think something like bishop b6 looks very dangerous, with the idea to come in with the queen on e3. It's sitting there intending to push the d-pawn to challenge the bishop. The knight has almost no squares to go to, and later on the bishop can also come to the long diagonal. Black is totally dominating the center. Therefore, white cannot take. White played here the move queen f2. But now another pawn ends up on c4. We had already seen a protected passed pawn, but now the pawn is back. After recapturing on c6, it is pushed to c4. It's another asset, definitely a very useful attacking weapon for later on. The pawn on a3 needs to be guarded as well. And I think white is having a very hard time holding both the king side and queen side together. It's very difficult to point out a good move. In the game, white played here the move g4. I should point out, if you want to play f4 with the idea of f5, black is going to play bishop f5, queen e6, and these pawns are not moving any further. Black has fantastic control over the open file and the light square, so black is totally in control. g4 is played with the idea probably to go queen g3 and try to wrap up the pawn on h3 at some point. Typical strategy, but white's position is not ready for that. As there followed the move f6, you're challenging the head of the pawn chain. If you do take with the pawn, there's queen takes f6, the diagonal for the bishop is open. Bishop can come into f4, maybe queen g5, bishop e3 ideas. I fail to see a good plan, and look, this rook can eventually come back to the open f-file as well. King h1 was played in the game with the idea that after take on e5, d takes e5, bishop b6, at least the king is not in a skewer. You can put the bishop on d4. But now, once again, Magnus shows very deep understanding as he goes for simplifications. He is no longer thinking about an attack. He's exchanging the bishops. He's now playing the move queen a7, so he's ready to play an endgame. And that's a remarkable change of plans. But it's really, really great, because you cannot maintain the blockade in the center. If the queen goes away, let's say to f4, the queen will come in to f2 with a massive mating threat. The knight is under pressure, the rook can come in. Tremendous play on the b file. The major pieces arrive on the second rank. Same happens if you play something like queen c3. The queen can come in to f2 once again, but you have also the connected passed pawns, which are fantastically supported by both the bishop and the queen, and the rooks will join the action as well. Therefore, queens were exchanged. Now after rook takes a7, how to evaluate this endgame? Well, it all depends on whether these pawns can be stopped or not, but white's knight on d2, it's really bad, and also this bishop is a great supporter of the pawns, and it neutralizes the advance of white's pawns. If you ever play f4, the pawn on g4 can just be taken. White played here the move rook c2, preventing the black rook from entering on b2 with a threat on the knight. But now, Magnus had calculated fantastically here. Play the move d4. These pawns are unstoppable. c3, d3, etc. The rooks will come behind. You cannot ignore them. Knight takes c4 was played. Did Magnus blunder a pawn here? Not really. There's rook c8, and you do attack the rook on c2 indirectly. The knight cannot move away. If you go knight e3, you can just take on e3 as the bishop covers the rook, so no time to win material. In the game, rook ac1 was played, over protecting the rook on c2, but now it's d3. Hitting the rook. Rook gotta go away. Keep the knight defended, but there is this move. Rook takes c4. Further simplifications. We get a rook endgame. Did Magnus go wrong here? No, the d-pawn is there. Threatening to be queened. Rook d4, trying to control the d-pawn from behind. So the d1 square, the promotion square is under control. But look, now rook c7 is there. And in the game, rook takes d2 was played. And now after rook c1, look at this pawn on h3. The king is caught in the mating net. It's back rank mate. Rook d1, rook takes d1. Game over. Just one final thing. Could white have avoided this mating scenario? He could have tried to run away with the king, but in that case there is rook to c1. King f2, d1 queen. The rook supports the promotion of the pawn and black emerges with an extra rook. I found this was a very impressive game. Note it was an online game, it was a rapid game, but Magnus showed really deep understanding. And it's a typical middle game strategy by launching Harry the h-pawn with attacking ideas. But you can even see that even towards the end game, this pawn on h3, it's a really important pawn, preventing the king from becoming active, and it's very often caught in the mating net. I think, at least I hope you enjoyed it. Make sure to subscribe to the channel for more awesome content like this. See you soon again. Bye bye.